Great. So next up, we got the Plenary Power Talk by Mr. John Knight. Mr. John Knight is the co-founder and chairman of Leadership Limited. John is an experienced coach, mentor, and facilitator of individuals, especially chairmen, CEOs, and senior managers. John is an expert in emotional intelligence and a thought leader in spiritual transpersonal leadership and relationship between neuroscience and leadership. He's a senior executive coaching award from the Oxford School of Coaching and Mentoring. John lectures at the University of Oxford on leadership environment. He's lived in Sweden, the Netherlands, Singapore, and the US over a period of 14 years. He's a freeman of the City of London, and the talk is titled Transpersonal Leadership. Ladies and gentlemen, a big round of applause for our Power Talk, John Knight, please.
Hey.
Is this not going to work? Okay. Yeah. Okay, while we're waiting for the connection, I was sat listening to the last speaker about how the world is changing, how technology is changing. What do you think that's going to do for our brains? What do you think that's going to do for leadership? All our beliefs about leadership have been turned upside down. I was going to give a little bit of information along those lines as well, but I don't really need to now. So just to make you understand that I come here not as a consultant really, but as a businessman. I spent, until I was 40, I was in large international corporations, and then I became a serial entrepreneur. And it was only about 14 years ago when I got my own coach for the first time. And a coach, by the way, in case anybody tries to tell you any different, is somebody who asks you questions and doesn't give you any answers, okay? So I got my coach, and he asked me lots of questions, and it helped me to find a few solutions for myself. And then eventually I decided I wanted to become a coach, because if he could make people's lives change, I wanted to make people's lives change too. So that was the first step towards getting into leadership development and understanding about leaders. And as a coach and with colleagues, we then reflected on our own leadership journeys and the journeys of the people that we were coaching and working with. And what we realized was that there was no best practice for leadership. There's plenty. Okay. Oh, right. Sorry. Oh, some over there as well. Can you hear me? Okay, I'll stick with this then for the time being. Hi. Sorry about that. There's actually seats over here if you want to join. Okay, so where was I? Yeah, so what we realized was that there was no best practice. You go and get your MBA, and there's plenty of best practice in business administration. There's plenty of best practice on how to drive a car. There's plenty of best practice of how to learn to play cricket, but there's nothing about leadership. And what we do with leadership is we send people or get people to do new things, new experiences. And that's fine. But what they learn is more by luck than by judgment. It's subconscious, it's random. So what we tried to do was base on the stories of all these leaders to actually build a journey that people could follow in parallel to their experiences, so that they could actually learn in an ongoing way in work. Sorry. Okay. About the reason I'm here now, actually, is because I was invited by Tata about a year ago to come to a workshop at a business conference and to launch a document, a publication that was actually sponsored by Tata and a few other people. And what I'm going to try and do now is to just give you a glimpse of the contents of that publication, which, if you're interested, is available online, free of charge, in a PDF form. So you can, I'll give you the link later at the end, but if you find any other problem in getting that downloaded, you can always send me an email. So, dancing in the rain. I think that's very apt because the leaders of today have to be prepared to lead in any situation. And if somebody asks me now, what is it going to be like next week, next month, next year, I don't have a clue, to be quite honest. There are so many things that can happen. You've heard many speakers today. Some of them are very optimistic about what's going to happen, and some are more pessimistic. We don't really know. So what we need to do is to be able to operate as leaders independent of the conditions of the outside world. And the only way we can do that is to change the way we lead compared to what traditionally we've been led to believe and taught. So everybody talks about high performance management. That's certainly the stuff you'll get at business school. You have to be visionary, you have to be results oriented, KPIs most important, you've got to work hard, pace setting, commanding. It's go, go, go. Which is all very well, except that you will have the problems resulting from that of stress, burnout, selfish behavior, uncaring, high staff turnover, and basically long term it's unsustainable. However, you can't do without that. You've still got to have those results, and you've got to have those hard work, and we've got to continue performing. The only way that we can help to do that is to bring in a 21st century method of leadership, which requires us to lead. Now, we all know that intellectually, that we need to listen more, but how many have actually gone to the effort of learning to listen more? Not many. A lot of people in this room will know that we need to have empathy in the 21st century when we're dealing with our people. But how many people have actually learnt to have more empathy? Humility, the same. Using a coaching technique with your people. How many have actually learnt to do that? To develop others. One of the key things, most important things for a leader is to develop the people they're directly reporting to. Quite often, they think that their development role is to send people on courses. And the final one is about being democratic. Now, I don't mean one man, one vote, but what I mean is allowing people to have their voice heard, to be involved, to be engaged. And what this results with is engagement, commitment, loyalty, sustainable productivity, and performance. So you've got to have the two together. You really do. This is a very apt quote, even though it's from the 19th century. Everyone thinks of changing the world, but no one thinks of changing himself. It should be herself, of course, in the 21st century. And this is very true, that particularly, I think, for entrepreneurs, we're so driven to make things happen, to reach our goals and so on and so forth, that what we often forget is that if we're going to do that in the best possible way, we will learn to actually change ourselves, to change our own behavior. I'm sorry, I'm forgetting you guys over there. Sorry? Okay, you're all right. You don't want to see me anyway, okay. So, if I can give leaders any sort of suggestions for a model to follow, the first thing I would say is if I can give you one word, it's awareness. Be aware. 2 words, it's emotional intelligence. 3 words, understand your brain. And 4 words, live beyond your ego. And we've had some really fantastic examples. I was actually pleased that I didn't come on after the previous speaker but one, because that was a hard one to follow. So let's look at those 4 things. Awareness. The world has changed. I don't need to go through that again, but the most important thing is about information. You know, we're talking about, gigabytes and terabytes of information. But the thing is how much information can we keep in our head? There was a longitudinal study done by Carnegie Mellon University. In 1985, the average executive could retain in their brain 75% of the information they needed to do their job. In 2005, it was about 10%. I don't have the latest figures, but you can work it out for yourself. It's probably getting close to 1%. Now, that doesn't mean to say that people are getting 25 times more stupid. What it means is that there is all that information that we need to be able to use to do our jobs. So if you go to ancient times, there was the saying that power was more important than knowledge. During the Industrial Revolution, we've tended to say knowledge is power. Well, it ain't anymore, because everybody's got that knowledge. They've got the information. So you have to learn to lead in a different way. There are a whole load of other things that have really happened to change the world as well. I mean, not least of all, society is changing at an incredibly fast rate. And today's generation coming into the workforce just won't accept the kind of leadership styles that were traditionally accepted. Then there's the question of awareness, which is self-awareness. What do we know about ourselves truly? Do we know which of our senses are our strongest? Do we really know our strengths and weaknesses? Are we optimistic or pessimistic? I would guess most in this room, being entrepreneurs, are optimistic. And also our emotional self-awareness. And then emotional intelligence. One of the things that we're not, as human beings, very good at naturally is understanding the emotions that we feel when we feel them. We're feeling emotions all the time. Just think, I'm sure everybody in this room can think of some situation in the last 24 hours that happened to them where they got emotional and they did something that they'd have wished they hadn't. You know, whether it's with your children, whether it's on the way to driving here, or some discussion with your colleague. And the thing is that unless we can learn to, first of all, be aware of those emotions and then to do something about it, we can't learn to behave properly with the people who work for us and work with us. And I just say one example: empathy. When I say, and it's well researched that empathy is one of the greatest things lacking in leaders today, it's very difficult for people to think, how do I become more empathetic? It's not easy. But if we break it down into granular forms, we start off by how do we learn to listen better? We can do that. But the single behavior that is most desired by workers of their bosses is that they understand their feelings. And not only they understand their feelings, but they actually demonstrate they understand their feelings. Now that's a step beyond what most people feel comfortable with. One of the reasons we feel uncomfortable with it is because of fear. We're afraid to show that kind of level of empathy. And so these are things that we really need to work at overcoming if we're going to be the great, excellent leaders that we can be. Just a thing on the difference between men and women. We've done a lot of research on the difference between men and women leaders. and we found very little difference. Also, the neuroscientists have also found very little difference in the brains, apart from the reproductive systems. There are two things, though, that we found that do show a difference. One is the perception is that men are better at emotional self-control than women, and that women are more service-oriented. They're more committed and more loyal. And that's come out of a study of hundreds of top leaders and middle-sized leaders as well. So it's just something to bear in mind. The third thing is to understand your brain. We're all born with Stone Age brains. The brain has not changed in evolutionary terms since the Stone Age, since 250,000 years ago. So what that means is that we have instincts that were suitable for the Stone Age, but they're not suitable for today's world. A typical one, as leaders, is that typical response of a leader is to know everything and tell people what to do. Now, there are a lot of people in this room who will have moved beyond that. They've learned that that is not the best way to lead. But when they get stressed, when I get stressed, we go back to it. We go back to having to know everything and tell people what to do. Now, the other thing about the Stone Age brain is it doesn't like being told what to do. You don't like being told what to do. One of the reasons you're entrepreneurs is because you don't like being told what to do. But what do you often do? You tell people what to do. So one of the key things is to learn how to engage and get people on board in a way that they can take responsibility. And one of the ways you have to do that is you have to learn to trust people more. So let's just quickly look at leadership styles. I'm not going to go through these, but there are basically six main styles. Each one of us has one natural style. And if we're really good leaders, we might be quite competent at 2. To be an excellent leader, you really need 6, because these are styles that you need to be able to use in different circumstances. The only way that you can be competent in 6 styles is to learn new behaviors. There is no shortcut on that. So you can either put up with the 1 or 2 leadership styles that you're naturally competent in, or you can make the effort to learn the other 4 by learning specific behaviors. And quite often, 3 or 4 very granular behaviors can be learned that can make a huge difference and have a huge impact on your leadership competence. Just having a look at culture, this is, I wouldn't say this is a typical culture of a company, but it's sort of average. Some will have more power and less structure and vice versa. But quite often, in most organizations, there is a fairly low support compared to the other 3. However, if we do a culture survey and we ask people what is their ideal culture, it doesn't matter whether we talk to the chairman, the CEO, or the person in the reception, that's the ideal. People want much less power orientation, less structure, and a lot of support. And that's what drives up the achievement. Live beyond the ego. A lot of people do that. A lot of people try to do that. But one of the things that many of us don't do is we don't live with our values at full consciousness. We don't use them as a touchstone for every decision we make. When we make decisions, we tend to make decisions for our own benefit. There's nothing immoral about that, but the thing is that quite often we're doing it subconsciously, or we feel that we're doing it for the organization. Be sure why you're making a decision. Most decisions are made because of a drive for power, prestige, reward, or recognition. That's the human condition. It really helps if you're aware of it, because if you're aware of it, then you can make a choice of whether you actually let the ego control you, or you can move beyond it. If we look at transpersonal leadership, which is the term we use for beyond the ego, I mean, in India, I wouldn't have any problem using the term spiritual leadership, but in Europe and in America, that has complicated connotations and unnecessary discussions. But what we're looking for as beyond the ego is to look at the benefits to everybody, to all stakeholders, and to do that consciously on every decision we make. And we believe that by looking at the decision making in this way, we will make sustainable long-term decisions rather than short-term decisions. A word on decision making. Most of our judgments, we are taught as we grow up and as we're educated and at university and business schools, we're taught to think rationally. When we go to the board or to our chairman or to our investor for a decision, we have to give a rational explanation. Yet the reality is that most of those original decisions came in an intuitive way, and then we spend all our time rationalizing them. Now, that's good. There's nothing wrong with that. The problem is that if we don't bring that intuitive thinking to a conscious level, we will allow our biases and prejudices to help us make decisions. We can't, if we don't look at it or bring it up to a conscious level, we can't eliminate those biases and prejudices which are built into us from our experience. They may be built into us from our experience. They may be built into us from our instincts or from our insights, which are all three different things that I don't have time to go into today. But all I would say is try to think about where your decision making is coming from and bring it to full consciousness so you can actually try to negate the biases and prejudices, which we all have. The other one thing that we need to bring into our decision making and judgment is ethical philosophy. Each of us have one of three basic ethical philosophies. It's either integrity in terms of, doing what is right. Secondly, social conscious. We do it because it's good for the people. Or we obey rules. We want to obey rules. And it's quite interesting that there's been a lot of research done on this, and they've taken tens of thousands of samples, and about a third have each type of ethical philosophy. So the person sitting next to you will probably have a different basis on which they make ethical decisions. There's no right and wrong, but it sure helps if you know where people are coming from. So, the high performance management really has to dance with the 21st century leadership to produce great leaders. And that provides a sustainable high performance management. And it's done really by identifying and learning and practicing new behaviors and bringing values to full consciousness. And do it in small amounts of time. We can't take all this stuff on board quickly. We need time to do that. Take it in small chunks and do it regularly. And it can become a lifelong exercise of learning that will help us to become better leaders. We have a journey that we follow where we start a rationally ego-based, as usual leadership. That's the starting point for most of us. And then as time comes, I don't know, that doesn't work. As time goes on, we can develop into emotionally aware leaders, robust emotionally aware leaders, and then to ethically authentic leaders. So just to finish off, my suggestion of how people would do that if they want to is get yourself a good coach, a real coach. Assess your own leadership competence. There's plenty of ways to get that, to have that assessed. A 360 assessment is a good way of doing it. Identify what your strengths and weaknesses are. And then with your top team as entrepreneurs, undergo a leadership program over a long period of time. But the secret word is practice, practice, practice. Thank you.
John, thank you very much. I think it's this time when we were setting the agenda again, you know, talking about setting the context of, you know, dancing in the rain. You know, leadership is a very important aspect. As to, you know, we heard all the different speakers and you know how they talked about, you know, that it's a test of character and I think the way you have described here on transpersonal leadership, what you heard from some of the speakers today, you know, what can you think about where we thought that they applied the emotional intelligence and this kind of leadership? Can you give one or two?
Okay. Well, I think there was a question by one guy this morning who said that only 10% of MBAs were employable or something like that. And I wouldn't necessarily agree with that, but I think that what you're taught in an MBA is not necessarily going to make you employable. It gives you a basic level of skills, of business skills. So it gives you a toolbox, but it certainly doesn't make you into a leader. I think that today, when we've seen there've been a lot of very high quality people here who are obviously good leaders, transpersonal leaders, a number of them. But I think that what we tend to forget is that there are very few who get to that stage of transpersonal leadership by luck and happenstance, and maybe some good genes and a good brain when they were born. But a lot of it is luck and being in the right place at the right time and learning from the right kind of experiences. My belief is that if you actually, in parallel with experiences, you provide proactive learning about learning new behaviors in particular, the behaviors that, you know, how should I treat you to get you to perform at your maximum? That's what it's all about. Because we talk about cutting costs, but we waste so much on the value of our human capital that we've got there. We don't maximize it. There was another guy an entrepreneur, who said was asked what kept him awake at night. And he said, you know, to make sure that people come to work and work hard the next day. Well, I would say that with the right kind of leadership, he won't have to worry about that. They'll come, they'll be committed, they'll believe in that company just as much as he does. But it's about how, and I'm not picking on him because he may be a very good leader, but unless he actually treats people in a way that is going to get them to be committed and own.
As committed as himself, as an entrepreneur.
Yeah,
so, so the trick is, as an entrepreneur, you've got to somehow, what they say, it's a cliche, it's a shared vision, but you know, get your people as excited as you, and that's the secret to success.
Well, there's another interesting thing about vision is that most entrepreneurs think that they've got to have all the ideas. You can be a visionary leader without having any ideas, as long as you get the ideas from other people. It's what you do with the ideas that's critical, not that you have them. There's always people who can have ideas.
You don't have to be. I mean, it's Steve Jobs' interview I was saying in the video, and I think Richard Reiki also mentioned that, is that they asked him, you know, that do you always win the arguments? And he said, I don't have all the ideas. I mean, he said the team that has the ideas.
But also, he's unique, of course. You know, I wouldn't recommend anybody tries to become another Steve Jobs. He's a unique human being. The key is, and I personally don't like this hero leadership anyway. What I like to say is, you know, work out how you can be the best leader you can be based on what your strengths are. Forget about other people. And we might be saying different things about Apple in 5 years' time. Who knows?
Yeah, that's true. when there's a big aura around it, when it lifts, then suddenly you find all problems with it. You know that always happens.
We heard those examples in Search of Excellence, for example.
Yes, how that was the Bible of management,
Absolutely.
And then people say, "What happened to those companies?" So, folks, it's been a very different and a great learning for all of us. John Knight that runs a think tank, well recognized, spent years in coaches many of the CEOs, some very global corporations. He came here specially to share his knowledge and experience with all of you. Please give him a big round of applause. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, John. And as we are doing with all the speakers, we will donate to a charity in your name. Some of the ones that were featured in previous sessions. Okay? Thank you.
I would request our charter member, Mr. Agnello Rajesh.
Yes, sir. Oh, come. Let's take a picture together. So, folks, we have now the final session by led by Mr. Mahesh Murthy. That should be a really, really exciting session. Building your personal brand through digital media, which is becoming so much part of our lives. I have one request from all of you sitting.